Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Recruit Military Live, a continuing series of live broadcasts covering all things military transition, veteran employment, and mil-spouse employment. My name is Lucas Connolly, retired U.S. Army officer and former TAP program manager. We're here to share the ins and outs of making that move from military service into the world of civilian jobs. If you are in search of a meaningful career opportunity, well, you're in the right place. Please visit rmvets.com/live to learn more. All right, let's roll right in. Today, we are talking about a senior leader's perspective on military transitions. We're going to take a look at the transition experience from the perspective of someone who has made that move at a very senior level. Now, unless you've been living on the dark side of the moon for the last 20 years, today's guest needs no introduction. But regardless, I'll try to do my best to deliver an introduction befitting of his amazing achievements. Our guest today is one of the most prominent U.S. military figures of the post-9/11 era. He's been described as a leading warrior intellectual and one of the great battle captains in American military history. He graduated with distinction from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He is the only person in Army history to be a top graduate of both the U.S. Army's Ranger School and the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College. And if that wasn't good enough, he went on to earn a Ph.D. from Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs. He served for over 37 years in the U.S. Army in Cold War Europe, Central America, the United States, Haiti, Bosnia, Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Greater Middle East, and Central Asia. He's most widely recognized for his command of the organization that produced the U.S. Army's Counterinsurgency Manual, FM 3-24, and which also overhauled all aspects of the preparation of leaders and units for deployment to combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. His career culminated with 6 consecutive commands, including command of the 101st Airborne during their fight to Baghdad in their first year in Iraq, command of the Multinational Security Transition Command in Iraq, command of coalition forces during the surge in Iraq, command of U.S. Central Command, and command of coalition forces in Afghanistan. He has taught at the U.S. Military Academy West Point, the Honors College of City University of New York, the University of Southern California, and has served as a senior fellow at Harvard University's Belfer Center. He is currently a visiting fellow at Yale University's Jackson Institute, and among other things, he sits on the boards of over a dozen veteran services organizations. Following his retirement from the military and after a unanimous Senate confirmation vote of 94-0, he served as director of the CIA during a period of significant achievements in the global war on terror, the establishment of important agency digital initiatives, and significant investments in the agency's most important asset, human capital. He is currently a partner with the global investment firm KKR and chairman of the KKR Global Institute, which he established in May of 2013. He's also a member of the board of directors of Optiv and First Stream. He's a venture investor in more than 15 startup companies and continues to be engaged in a variety of academic endeavors. Ladies and gentlemen, General David Petraeus.
Well, thanks, Lucas. It's great to be with you, and thanks also for what you do for our veterans.
And thank you for being on the show. It's really an honor to have you here.
Honor's mine. Thanks.
And to all our viewers out there, now that you've heard about who we are, let's hear about who you are. Welcome to the show. Hit the chat window. Let's hear where you're watching from, who you are, who you served with, what your status is. Are you active duty, transitioning? Are you a veteran? Are you a mil-spouse or a caregiver? If you've got questions or comments, feel free to slide them into the chat. Okay, sir, as they say, we are wheels up. Now, back in 1974, if my research is correct, you commissioned into the Army. And at that time, transition assistance programs like the ones we have now just simply did not exist. Even decades later, early attempts to provide such services were often assessed as woefully lacking. Today, thankfully, we have a veritable legion of programs dedicated to supporting the needs of service members who are transitioning civilian life. If you had the opportunity to speak with the leaders of those programs, perhaps in one big auditorium, civilian and military programs and organizations alike, what guidance would you have for them?
Well, I guess it would be pretty general. I think you've captured the evolution of the programs pretty accurately. And I think at this point in time, what needs to be done continually is to really take it seriously, to recognize that this is an obligation we have to individuals who rose their right hand and took an oath of office or enlistment at a time of war still for those that are leaving the service at this point. Fence the time, absolutely. Don't pull them out of it. Don't divert them from it. And perhaps, maybe above all, though, understand that one size doesn't fit all. Transition, just like morale, is an individual event. And those who are transitioning have a variety of differences, different skills, different experiences, different amounts of time in service, different rank, different expertise, different family situations, different positions along the way, and even different desires. I mean, some of those who are transitioning don't want to go right into the workforce. They want to use their GI Bill and go into education. And so my point is that transition programs need to really understand who their clients are, what their population consists of in each individual program, and then try to make what it is that they're going to share, to impart, to expose these individuals to, be as relevant to each and every one of them as is possible. Now, obviously, if you have a special subset of people, those who serve to 20 or 30 or what have you in special operations forces of one type, it's a lot easier to craft something for them that would be relevant and really helpful, and again, be for them. Much more difficult, obviously, if it's a bigger, broader group of individuals. But again, those who are running these programs, I think by and large get that. I think by and large, the question is whether we will continue to resource them properly. Make the whatever it is. For a long time there were good intentions but inadequate resources, both in terms of time, computers, individuals to help them with resumes, all the rest of this. There's just all kinds of stuff that was inadequate in terms of these programs. I think generally, by and large, we have started to get it right. And the question now is, how bespoke can you make it for each individual in that grouping, while still doing it as efficiently, economically, and effectively as is possible?
Oh, absolutely. Let's switch gears for just a second and talk a little bit about leadership. Now, you've had a lengthy career as a leader, starting from second lieutenant all the way up to four-star general. You just don't get more than that. Military leaders, as you know, we have a unique way of leading the men and women that stand in our formation. As young leaders, we were raised on things like purpose, direction, and motivation. And if we stayed in the military long enough, we started to think strategically in terms of ends, ways, and means, how to spend that dime to achieve the overall goals. Many of our military senior leaders aspire to transition into leadership roles when they leave the military into civilian sectors. Many have their eyes on the C-suite. What advice would you give to military leaders looking to transition into leadership roles in the corporate world? What traits should they hold on to, and what leadership traits perhaps should they be prepared to refine and adapt so that they can acclimate to the civilian culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think in general, the values, the traits, the principles, and so forth, not just of leadership, but just of interacting with fellow human beings and all the rest of that, I think all of that generally is valued very highly in the civilian world. You should cling to those elements and protect them and so forth. What's different, and I think you have to expect will be different, number one is the style of leadership that you will employ. Now, to be truthful, if someone has gone, if you do 37 years in the military, as I did, you change your style along the way. You have to. I mean, what works as a young infantry second lieutenant in an airborne rifle platoon, which I was privileged to lead in Vicenza, Italy, early in my career, is a very different style of leadership. I mean, that's very visceral. It's very physical.
Yeah.
It's very, follow me, do as I do. Let's do
directive.
All that stuff. Yeah, let's go. And you lead from the front and so forth. But as you get higher and higher, it's no longer just all sort of hard charging infantrymen, or now even infantrywomen. It expands. At a certain point, you get individuals who have egos. The more you go, the more of that you find. But in all seriousness, again, what works at very small unit level doesn't work at higher levels. The responsibilities are different, the importance of getting the big ideas right, communicating them effectively through an enormous organization, overseeing their implementation, figuring out how to refine them and do it again and again and again, increasingly becomes the essence of what it is that you're doing. You know, if you're commanding, as an example, say, I don't know, 200,000 US and coalition forces in Iraq with a similar number of contractors and even greater number of Iraqi counterparts, I mean, that's a very, very different enterprise. And you don't do that by saying, follow me and do as I do. You do it with a battle rhythm. You do it. I mean, there's a whole host of differences, and the style is different. Again, I very, very seldom was visibly agitated, if you will. I mean, there were places where I was acting as a four-star. And there were a couple of situations. And, you know, I would go to the meeting and I'd tell the ambassador, who would go to every meeting that we did with the senior Iraqis, you know, I'm going to demonstrate the full range of emotions. Now, the key is to be acting. You can actually demonstrate the full range of emotions when you lose it. You don't want to do that. But my point is that you're very conscious of, you know, you don't rip people on a daily, much less weekly, monthly basis even. I mean, you do it when you need to do it for effect. There was a situation in Iraq where literally I said, I'm going to keep at this until that individual no longer comes to these meetings because he's going to get tired of hearing from me. And by the way, when he stops, then I will hand the meetings over to Lieutenant General Diurno, because it really should be at his level anyway. But again, my point is, you know, with my own team, I mean, they'd know if I was a little bit irritated or, as I would say, exercised. But you don't, again, you can't lose it. You can't lose control. And again, so this is the same in the civilian world. I mean, all of the sitcoms and everything else to the contrary, it's the same traits, the same values, the same principles. You do need a different style. And you have to understand as well that there is a high likelihood that the organization will be less hierarchical than the ones in which we have exercised leadership in the military. And also that they may be much more matrixed, in fact. And of course, you can't fall back on your rank. I mean, you can to a degree if someone is in a leadership position and so forth. But the organizational architecture is very likely to be different. And again, it's very likely to have some degree of matrix elements in it. And then, you know, there's a different culture as well. But here, each organization has a different culture, from those that are out in Silicon Valley to those in other places in, say, the manufacturing or industrial sector. So it's really about just doing the same thing that you've always done, actually, as you have progressed, which is to understand the new organization, understand your responsibilities in it, and then to understand how most effectively and efficiently to give direction, to inspire, to provide example, to see for yourself, again, to determine specifically how to spend your time, because it's such an important component of it, and all the rest of that. But in many, I would say that by and large, the commonalities are greater than the differences when it comes to the values, the principles, and so forth that are highly prized. And you should cling to those. Again, those are in many cases why people want someone coming from the military. Those are seen as great qualities to add to an organization.
And you know, many of these, I'm reminded, I hear you talking about, you know, understanding the organization you're going into, being adaptive as a leader. This sounds an awful lot like some of the advice in 3-24. Understand the culture of the organization you're working with, the indigenous populations, their expectations, norms, and values.
Yep. And be a learning organization. In the either the preface or one of the upfront elements in that field manual that I drafted and I think signed along with someone else, I wrote that it's really important to learn. You have to have a learning, you have to create a culture, that of a learning organization, because the side that learns the fastest typically prevails in that type of conflict. Well, it actually typically prevails in business as well. If you think about a company like Kodak, which actually had 2,000 patents on digital photography, but failed to make the shift to digital photography and hung on to film photography for too long. that's a pretty big penalty. And Kodak is by no means the company that we knew it as in its heyday. So you've got to be a learning organization in the civilian world as well. And if anything, it's a world that is evolving more and more rapidly because of various aspects of digitization, the internet, social media, and all the rest of that.
Oh, absolutely. So we talked for a little bit about being adaptive, adapting to the new environment, adapting to the new civilian workforce. Many of our service members struggle to find meaningful careers after they leave the service. Loss of identity, loss of a sense of purpose, challenges translating their military experience and skills into terms that civilian employers can understand. These are all challenges they tend to face. Often we make the mistake of assuming these challenges are unique to our junior enlisted or to some lesser degree our junior military officers. Some tend to believe that senior leaders like yourself transition is much more different, with visions of boardroom doors flung open and six-figure salary offers dangling at every corner. Having transitioned yourself after 3 decades of military service into the government service and then finally into private equity, can you separate for us the facts from the fiction? What challenges did you face that you might not have expected, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I'll try to generalize because I think I'm a fairly unique individual in this regard with a slightly non-standard career. You mentioned, a PhD as well as various battlefield commands and then director of the CIA. That's not sort of the standard career, and it obviously gave me some opportunities that probably otherwise would not have been open to me. I think in truth, there is a very small subset of individuals who take the uniform off and for whom there are board seats waiting in the red. And it's generally those who are very, very well known, who are very highly respected. It's the Admiral Mullins of the world, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mattis, General Dunford, Admiral McRaven, and so forth, all of whom I worked very closely with over the years and share the respect that others have for them. And for individuals like that, there are these opportunities, but they're not the normal individuals. I'm not the normal individual either. What I would say is that for anyone, if you go into a real job, and I don't mean to say that a board is not a real job, but you're not leading an organization at the end of the day. You are advising the chairman of the board and or often the CEO as well in the same person. But the point is that you are, again, there's a responsibility, but it's not a hierarchical leadership position. If you're going to be in an organization where you're sort of working 9 to 5 or close to that, even if you have a portfolio of activities, you have to show that you can hustle, that you can actually hustle your own bags. I mean, one of the breakthrough moments for me, I was not brought in as a partner. I was brought in to establish the KKR Global Institute to do geopolitical risk for the investments we're examining, to integrate the macroeconomic analysis, the environmental social governance issues analysis, a little bit like CI director does for the national security team, except here we're doing it for the investment committees of a firm that now has well over $460 billion under management, owns 120 companies around the world, and has minority investments in another 100. So it's an enormous organization. But there was a moment where I literally showed that I could hustle my own bags. I mean, literally, all the plane flights got canceled. I talked my way onto a flight without a boarding pass. None of the other colleagues could get on it. Eventually, I made my way to where I was supposed to be the next day for a very early morning event in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'd showed up at something like 3 a.m. They weren't even aware I was there. And, that was hey, this guy can actually, he didn't have any aides with him. There was no security detail. There was no protocol, all this stuff. He did this on his own. And increasingly they recognize, because again, look, I had more speech writers back in the day, not just all the other folks around. You have enormous apparatus in a command or CIA or some very, very major government departments or agencies. This is very, very different. These are very lean organizations. The salaries are quite considerable, and that's why. So again, you got to get out there and do this for yourselves, and you have to demonstrate that. I think for the senior folks, that may be the single biggest indice that they're looking for, because they think, is this person going to come here and expect somebody is going to, drive them to and fro and open the door and, spool up the laptop and do everything else for him or her? Or can this person do stuff on his own? So that's a big deal. But to come back to where you started with that question, I think that individuals transitioning do have to recognize that it's very, very difficult to actually find three elements that are uniquely present when you are in uniform. And they are a mission larger than self, particularly true in the war years, needless to say, for those who are deploying endlessly. And I was certainly part of that and experienced that with them. And I'll never forget re-enlisting 1,215 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines on the 4th of July in 2008. One of 8 July 4ths, I think, in the decade or 11 years after 9/11 that I spent abroad. And, again, one of the huge reasons they were doing this is because this mission larger than self, by the way, we were winning in that, we had actually driven violence down by 85%. They felt privileged to be part of it. There's a sense of community. Again, you're privileged to soldier with others who feel the same way that you do. Again, you don't beat your chest about it. You're not talking about, hey, well, isn't it wonderful we have a mission larger than self? It's sort of a quiet awareness and a degree of quiet pride that when you're going to go home, people are going to recognize you're engaged in the main effort of our country around the world. And then there's a sense of identity, undeniably, that comes from wearing the uniform. And whether it's the battle dress or the dress, perhaps especially the dress, especially in the Army, which has so many different badges and medals and everything else for everything, you can literally read an individual's career in his or her uniform. You can, as Sergeant Major, the great Sergeant Major Marvin Hill, who was my senior enlisted advisor in 4 of those 5 combat tours, used to say, you can tell who we are, what's the patch of the unit you're in, where we come from, what's the patch of your combat unit, how long we did it, the number of 6-month hash marks in your right sleeve for time in combat, all of the different badges, qualifications, service medals, and on and on. And then, of course, the valorous awards and so forth. So, look, that doesn't exist out there. At most you can sort of get something in your lapel, and maybe, you can have your tie clasp. I'll show it to you. This is an ISAF tie clasp, but that's about it. And so get over it, though. Recognize, again, now that's not to say that you can't engage in work that is very meaningful, that's very important, that is intellectually stimulating, that is rewarding. It can be even gratifying in various ways. I'm not joking when I say it's wonderful to be part of a firm that invests in companies and helps them grow, and we don't pull them apart and sell them off for parts the way that it used to be perhaps in the early days, or load them up with debt or whatever. You try to make them grow. Doesn't work 100% of the time, but the vast majority of the time it does, which is why people have given us well over $460 billion of their pension funds, endowments, and all the rest of that. And this is very, very meaningful work. And then to give individuals in these companies ownership, all of a sudden they open an envelope and realize they actually own part of the company. They have stock in that company, equity, if you will. On and on. There are innumerable ways in which this is very, very seriously important to the individuals who are engaged in the work, and obviously those who have invested through us in it, hoping that they'll obviously get something for their investment. And invariably that is the result, or again, they wouldn't be doing this. And there's tons of examples of this. Again, this can be very, very energizing and again, stimulating and rewarding. And so you can find that. But, is it commanding the surge in Iraq? No. And, look, there was one surge in my lifetime in uniform. And, I was incredibly privileged to command it, and then to command the largest commitment that we had in Afghanistan as well. But those are very, very few and far between. They're very rare. You can prepare your entire life career for that. And most likely, in most cases, it does not come along. If the opportunity does come, you want to be prepared. And the same is true, obviously, in the civilian world. But I think you just have to have measured expectations that there are certain elements of civilian work and the private sector that are incredible and are phenomenal and wonderful. There are also certain elements that, remind you that it is why they call it work. And it does not have, again, this unbelievable mission larger than self, this extraordinary community of individuals who have all, again, raised their right hand at a time of war and take an oath, or just the sheer identity of wearing a uniform. But that's just something you have to understand, you have to accept, you have to acknowledge. There are also other endeavors in which people can engage. I mean, if you think about some of the nonprofits, Team Rubicon, for example, the mission of that is directly associated with what I'm talking about. It serves veterans by serving others. It gives veterans a mission larger than self to help individuals in the wake of natural disasters. It actually gives you a sense of community because you're doing it with others who have volunteered to engage in this noble mission. And it even gives you a sense of identity, a t-shirt that says Team Rubicon on it. And again, there are other organizations like that. That's just one that I'm privileged to support. So I think it's just understanding the reality. I also often caution, obviously, those who are in the senior military ranks will call me and ask for thoughts as they're preparing to transition. And I do caution that, don't believe what people are telling you. Usually people from the outside that, oh my gosh, you commanded, again, U.S. Central Command. Clearly you should be right in line to command or to be the CEO of General Motors. And, not really. You actually probably ought to know something about
cars,
about manufacturing, about, again, a whole host of different skills, tasks, and so forth before you could contemplate that. And I think we have to be very careful not to think that just because, we had a very senior position, either as commissioned or non-commissioned or warrant officers, that automatically qualifies you to lead some enterprise. I think people occasionally drop off the Global Institute part of KKR Global Institute and say, oh, yeah, the chairman of KKR. Wow, that must be awesome. It is for the two individuals that built KKR, were the co-CEOs and are still the co-chairman 40 some odd years later, who have obviously spent their life learning how to invest incredibly well and learning about the world of finance and investment, which is not this is not for the weak or faint-hearted. This is an intensely competitive arena. And it is one that requires extraordinary expertise and a whole host of other skills, sets of knowledge and attributes.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, and my transitions, there was nothing like yours. Sometimes I think it's just the little things that you miss. I recall being in my civilian workplace and thinking to myself, is somebody going to take the trash out? And then I said, well, you know what? I guess I'd better take the trash out. It's my trash. So you mentioned credibility within the industry as being crucial. You mentioned about adapting to how to influence different groups. Military veterans enter the workforce. They come with an inordinate amount of leadership experience. But they're typically lacking that experience that makes them credible within the industry that they're entering. We expect our junior-most folks, our strategic corporals, our brand new lieutenants, to operate within the commander's intent and to demonstrate disciplined initiative. We expect them to make decisions in the absence of guidance. In the civilian world, however, some recruiters, some HR managers, they struggle to appreciate the importance of this experience or to even qualify that this is, in fact, experience. On paper, there are times when these qualities do not necessarily align with corporate cultures where, like you said, industry expertise is crucial to credibility, and collaboration and soft influence needs to happen at every level, as opposed to authority-based influence or just follow me, do as I say. What are the most valuable skills transitioning service members, vets, and mil spouses bring to the civilian workforce? How do employers What do employers need to appreciate about these exceptional men and women when they're considering whether or not to hire from the military community?
Well, first, I would submit that employers actually have learned this over the last, I don't know what it is, the last 5 to 10 years. There's absolutely conclusive evidence that employers really highly prize veterans. The facts are also clear. They're undeniable that for active duty veterans in particular, their unemployment rate is much lower than the general rate of unemployment. Now, that shouldn't be surprising. These are individuals that held full-time jobs, that got up early, that did PT, whether it was, wet and cold or really nice outside, that fought against adaptive, determined, sometimes barbaric enemies, that carried out important missions, had enormous levels of trust. You mentioned leadership at a young age. Our son was a second lieutenant rifle platoon leader, also in an airborne unit out of Vicenza, Italy. Went immediately to Afghanistan on joining his unit. Was a platoon leader in combat, 40, 45 men on a given day. And, a tough area of Wardak province, Combat Outpost Syedabad. I don't know when he'll lead that number of individuals again. That's a lot of people actually in the civilian world. And again, the civilian world highly prizes those capabilities. Again, that's why they're fought over. I'm also, we have additional duties in my world as well as in the military. And one of mine is to be the chairman of the KKR Vets at Work program. This has been around for about 9 years. It had already started just before I arrived. And then we tried to inject a good bit of additional energy in it to build on what was established. We have now hired, we believe, we'll get the official statistics in a short amount of time, actually, in the early year. We have hired over 100,000 veterans and spouses. Wow. By the way, we value spouses as well. Now, by we, what I'm talking about are the American companies that are the ones hiring veterans that we own. So of our 120 companies, I don't know what subset would be American or North American, again, or those that would hire, again, U.S. military veterans, but it's a reasonable subset. Again, that reflects how highly you can't force your companies to do that. They will hire who they want to hire, and they have come to recognize that they want as many as they can get. And then they can invest in the individuals with education, with job training, mentoring, and all the rest of that. That's very, very important. But look, they value all the same qualities that employers value in civilians, with this recognition that these folks have had some extraordinary experiences that give them a degree of resilience, of maturity, of judgment, of interpersonal skills, obviously of leadership capabilities, and all the rest of that. And they know that you have to perform a mission until it's complete. They know that you're not going to give up when the going gets tough. They've climbed mountains in the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan with 80 to 100 pounds of kit on them, and all the rest of this. So there's an enormous premium put on veterans, and again, as I mentioned, spouses, because spouses have shared many of these experiences, obviously on the home front, but have demonstrated all equal levels of determination, resilience, fortitude, adaptability, and all the rest of that. Moving around a fair amount, depending on how long the sponsor has been in service and so forth. So again, I think there is a very, very real desire for these individuals. What I do think that I would advise most of all is that veterans they really do understand what they really bring, and they do it in a coldly realistic way. Some bring hard skills that are absolutely directly translatable. Others do not. I mean, where is the artillery or infantry or armor specialist, tank commander or something like that? What's the analogy in the civilian world? But again, they bring these extraordinary qualities, values, experiences, and leadership expertise, and the business can then build on that. And I think the key for veterans is to recognize that what they should seek is a career opportunity, not just a job. Now, everyone is in a different situation. Those without family, children, anything, spouse and so forth might have more flexibility and wait longer and all the rest of that. Others with a lot of family responsibilities may feel a degree of urgency. Again, I would just caution, try to hold out for that opportunity that gives you a real chance for advancement, a chance to be invested in terms of training and even education, where individuals will mentor you, where there are affinity groups for veterans, all the rest of this, so that the chances of real progression and again, a real career, rather than just, again, a 9 to 5 that someone is not going to find much in terms of self-actualization and stimulation and reward and all the rest of that. That, I think, is the key. That's doable. And again, the key, if you get that, is to show that you are value added. Businesses don't normally do charity. They do charity, but they don't hire people just for charitable reasons. Not the firms in which you want to have a job, frankly, and again, a career. And you have to demonstrate that. And again, I had to do that as well. And it wasn't for, another year and a half that they actually said, you know what, you've shown that you are value added. You've shown that you can hustle your own bags. You've shown that you can produce on your own. All of these, you are enormous value added, and we want so much value added, we want to make you a partner. That's what you want to achieve. But again, how do you do that? It's the same old recipe for success that individuals have learned and experienced in uniform, which is just plain hard work. The God-given talents, to be sure, brains, interpersonal skills, leadership capability, developed expertise, operational judgment, all of this, able to inspire, to give energy, to incentivize, to guide, and so forth. All of these skills, this knowledge, these attributes, the SKEs, as they're referred to in the leadership manuals, this stuff matters in the civilian world just as much as it does in the military world, with the acknowledgement that, again, you shouldn't be expected to, be on the short list for CEO of Raytheon if you haven't spent a lifetime building military technology. You might be value added on the board, but not again, making your way up at a rapid pace. So I think a lot of this is, again, about being realistic with oneself, and then making the most of what it is that one can bring. The best bit of advice that I had, actually, when I was, out hustling around, seeing what the opportunities were, and thankfully there were quite a few over time, and they were actually competing, which was really terrific. But one of the individuals, a phenomenal hedge fund founder and CEO who will remain unnamed, he said, General, you don't understand how to monetize yourself. And I responded, not only do I not understand how to monetize myself, I don't even know what you're talking about. And he then sort of went through how I could be of enormous value. It turned, he said, just take KKR. There were actually several firms that he rattled off. He had tremendous intelligence. He knew who was competing at that time, who else was waiting on the outside. But I think, again, the enduring value of that advice is really quite considerable. I mean, that's really profound stuff. Figure out, what is it? How can you monetize what it is you bring? How can you provide value added? And then determine, how do you build on that? And how do you keep your intellectual capital fresh? How do you gather additional? How do you develop new knowledge? Again, you should never stop learning and studying and so forth. You should be individually a learning organization. You should make sure your organization's a learning organization, all of this. But I think that's pretty profound advice, again, that has very much stood up over time. And I've offered it, in the, 9 years now, since I left government service, to a number of other individuals. And I think it does help them get a sense of what it is that we all should be trying to do when you're going from this extraordinary experience in uniform with a mission larger than self, a community, and an identity that really are very, very hard to replicate in the civilian world, if that's possible at all. But recognizing that there can be extraordinary missions, communities, organizations, and even identity. I actually, KKR, like any large organization, has swag. You have these bags and it says KKR on the outside or something like that. I'm so proud of being part of KKR. I actually look down when I often take the train back and forth to New York from Washington. And when I'm carrying one of those bags, I actually make sure that the KKR is facing out. I want people to know that I work for KKR. I'm not turning it to the inside because I don't know, I commanded the surge. Why do I want to proclaim that I'm part of one of the world's great investment firms, the greatest investment firms? Again, it's an extraordinary organization. I'm very proud to be part of it. I hope that many, many veterans can have a similar sense of pride in the organization with which they work after life in uniform or government. And I hope that, again, they can find sufficient mission, community, and identity to make it, never going to be compared to, again, soldiering during the surge, but it can be pretty special.
Absolutely. Well, if we could just take a minute, General Petraeus, and just take a look at the folks that have shared some of their time with us today. We've got some folks that work in professional certification programs that support veterans. We've got some folks that work for 501c3 veteran support, transition services type organizations. We've got some retirees. We've got some folks from the Department of Labor, ENPP program. We've got an author and a retired Army officer himself. Mr. Kiefer has joined us. We've got a few other folks from my company, RecruitMilitary, who are on the line. You've got a couple of TAP managers on the line, a few retired special operators who are working with the special operations folks, trying to help them with their retirement. You've got a great audience right here, both folks in and out of uniform, supporting those in and out of uniform. Just a few moments, sir. Closing comments.
Well, particularly, I should obviously target this, I think, at those, many of whom I was privileged to serve, again, in the war years and in the war zones. And I suspect a number of those have, especially in the wake of our withdrawal from Afghanistan, been felt down, felt disheartened, heartbroken, and just sort of wondered, is it worth it, and so forth. And especially given the sacrifice, and especially having lost, airborne buddies and wingmen and all the rest of this, and seen others who've had their lives changed because of life-altering wounds. And I just have to say that, again, what everyone did during those years, I believe was really, it was noble. I don't want to get too carried away here, but I could. Everyone in those years was a volunteer. No one forced us to go into uniform service. We really never had problems meeting recruiting goals during those years because, again, I think of the sense of mission, community, identity, importance, and all the rest of this. And I just think everyone should remain proud, quietly proud, perhaps. Again, this is not something you don't beat your chest about this kind of stuff, but should be very quietly proud to have been part of an endeavor that was larger than self, and to have done it with fellow individuals who felt the same way, and at a time of enormous importance for our country. And yes, what we worked for 20 years in Afghanistan in particular did not endure. We know why it didn't in the end. Could have, had we had strategic patience. We won't relitigate all of that. I think what we provided for the Afghan people and for Afghanistan as a country were 20 extraordinary years. It's tragic and heartbreaking and disastrous to see what transpired. after we withdrew and how we withdrew. But at the end of the day, everybody should be very, very proud of what they were part of. And again, these were enormously important missions that we were engaged in. The Iraq one stood up. Obviously, the accomplishments there have been, they've actually had 5 or 6 peaceful transitions of power. There's endless drama. There was ISIS and so forth, and a lot of efforts by the Iraqi prime minister to undo what we had done together right after we left, et cetera. Lots of reason for frustration and so forth. But again, look, everybody should remain very proud of what it was that we were collectively privileged to be part of. I think the country values that service enormously. It's way beyond thank you for your service and those kinds of gestures and impulses, and recognizes, again, the value of veterans, especially those, I think, in those years who experienced the brotherhood of the close fight, which obviously has women in it as well as men now, and endured what it was that we all experienced together downrange. So I guess that's what I would leave with everyone. It's why I feel that we do have an obligation to provide transition programs, to provide opportunities and so forth.
Yes.
But it's also why I very much want to see those who are transitioning seek a career, not just a job. A career is really different. It has opportunities for advancement. It has training. It has education. It has mentoring. It has affinity groups. It has real chances to grow and learn and progress. And I think our veterans are admirably suited to capitalize on such opportunities. And I hope that as many of them as is possible can actually have those kinds of opportunities.
General, I couldn't have said it any better myself. And I want to thank you for taking the time being with us today, the guidance
Thank you.
And the feedback and some of the perspective you've given to us. It has been a privilege. And thank you very much to our audience who joined us today and for all your comments. And for you folks out there in the audience, if you haven't had a chance to do so already, head over to our website, rmvets.com/live. 16,000 employers looking for veteran talent, over 400,000 opportunities. Look for that career, like the general said. Don't snap at that first job just because you feel like you're not valued. Find that meaningful career opportunity, and RecruitMilitary is just one of the many resources out there to help you do that. General Petraeus, once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you, Lucas. And thanks
for everybody
for our veterans.
Oh, and thank you for what you're continuing to do with KKR and with your veteran initiatives there.
You bet.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Look forward to seeing you on our next broadcast. Until then, this has been Lucas Connolly for RecruitMilitary for RecruitMilitary Live. Until our next broadcast, folks, good luck and Godspeed.